30 to 40 years ago, as people began looking at the genetic data, what they realized is that there's a lot of evidence that actually there was a migration, humanity seemed to originate in Africa and then migrate and cover the earth, migrated from Africa to cover the earth. And that happened on the order of 100 to 200,000 years ago, thousands of years ago, not millions of years ago. Now again, I just want to highlight the contrast in those pictures, because we tend to think, oh, this is what's been thought all along. But the dominant picture throughout most of the scientific investigation of this has been a very different picture, this multi-regional hypothesis instead of this out of Africa hypothesis. Now there's one reason why I highlighted these three things, is that very often people talk as though science and Christianity are in conflict, that science shows you the facts, shows you how things really work, and religion, Christianity, and all those other religions, they just kind of give you stories that kind of are fun to think about but don't have any bearing in reality, that they actually lead you down the wrong way and stifle scientific advance. But I want to look at Christianity in particular about what it has to say about these three things. Because if we look at Big Bang cosmology, what we'll find is that as we look at Scripture, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That there was a beginning to things. John 1:1 echoes that sentiment. That idea permeates Scripture, that there was a beginning, things had a beginning, and what happens after that has consequences. When we look at how does the universe behave, you've got multiple authors, Isaiah, Zechariah, talking about how God is stretching out the heavens. Now, I'm not so sure that the ancient authors were thinking about expansion, but I find that terminology remarkable, considering what we know about the universe today and what they thought about the universe at the time. And when you again, look at how creation relates to God. God upholds creation, that if he were to withdraw his hands, it would tumble into nothingness. But he does so in a way that is so reliable and consistent and regular and orderly that we can actually talk about things called the laws of physics. That ultimately, how the universe behaves is anchored in God's character. And so this idea of constant laws of physics flows very naturally from that idea. And so, again, I want to just contrast that with, for much of the 1900s, the scientific picture of the universe was very different than what it is today. But what we see today aligns very well with what the Bible has said about creation all along. So if we go look at the early earth, well, most people know Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. But 1:2 describes what the early earth looked like. And the earth was formless and void, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. So it was formless and void. There was no structure to it. Not only that formless and void has the idea of hostile to life. That it was dark, it was covered with water. Well, we look at what science is showing about how the early earth looked, and it was dark and covered with water, and it was formless and void and hostile to. It's a remarkably consistent picture again. And, when you go look at humanity, Bible in Genesis 1 there talks about Adam and Eve are the progenitors of all humanity. So we start from a small population, in the thousands of years ago, from the Mesopotamia region, that then they migrate out and cover the earth. In fact, God has to command that a couple of times to get humanity to actually do that. But nonetheless, humanity's migrated out and filled the earth. And we're made in God's image. So we have this capacity to relate to God. We're exceptional from all the other animals. And again, I don't want to imply that this is done deal. Oh, clearly, obviously, we've got this right. But what I want to highlight is this. It is remarkable that the biblical authors, thousands of years before we actually could measure what's going on and figure out what's going on scientifically, describe the origin of the earth, the origin of the universe, the early earth, and the origin of humanity in a way that is remarkably consistent with what we find scientifically today.